Hi, my name's Mary Lark, and I'm a student at Flatiron School working on my final project for object-oriented Ruby. One of the project requirements is that I create this video to demonstrate how I developed the project and what the project's final outcome looks like. The first thing that I wanted to talk about was the decisions that went through my mind on trying to figure out how I was going to do this project. I needed a website, of course, that I could reach out to that was going to provide me with some information, and that I could dig a little deeper and find a little additional information to satisfy the requirements. The only problem was which website. And I went through a lot of different ideas, and finally I had decided, why don't I just do something that helps me? Because in the future I'm going to be wanting to buy another Apple. And I do know a little bit about apples in the first place, so it seemed like kind of a logical place to go. And a friend of mine who works at Apple showed me this site, which I thought was perfect because then I can save some money as well. So I thought I would check out the site and see if this is going to work for my needs. So I came here and I saw that there were all kinds of options here, which I really didn't want to deal with. So I selected Max and went over to the next page where you have filtering options. And I wanted to see what the page looked like. So I went over to the developers tool. And in the developers tool, the first thing that I came upon, let's just make it easy on ourselves, was this product tile hero div that offered this information. And then more information, but these were all on MacBook Pros. And I'm like, well, I don't know if I want to buy a MacBook Pro. I might change my mind and go with a MacBook Air, or I might want to do something like a desktop. So what else does this site have to offer? Let's look. And so I scrolled down, and all of a sudden I stumbled upon this area that had tons of LIs. And I'm like, what are these LIs? So I opened them up and I looked at the description, and here you can see this is for MacBook Mini or for Mac Mini, and it gives me the price and the savings. And I'm like, well, that's cool, but what else can I see here? And I came in and I found a 21.5-inch iMac. So as I'm looking at this, I'm going, you know what? This is the entire refurbished inventory. This is like gold. I just hit it. So I was really happy with the fact that we have a div class that I can grab. And in grabbing this div class, I get all of these LIs, and every LI refers to an individual refurbished computer, and every href in here provides me a link, and I checked out the link, and it turns out the link takes me to additional information for that particular computer, which is very cool. And it also gives me the model, the CPU, the number of cores, the core models, and the color of the computer. So this is going to take a little bit of work. I'm going to have to parse through this and extract this information to store it in a meaningful way. But here, as price, current price, I can just pull out the text value there, as well as product tile savings price and previous price. And sometimes it has the information, sometimes it doesn't. But let's go ahead and look at the secondary page for our secondary search and see if that's going to provide me with the information I'm going to be able to extract as well. So initially I looked over at this page and I was like, well, I already have this information from my first reach and I don't really need it. Um, I don't need it again. So what else does it have? And it turns out that it has these interesting product information, features, tech specs. All of this stuff looked really kind of interesting, but you know, when I'm making a decision to buy, initially I really just kind of want to see what's available out there at a higher level. So I opened up product information and I thought, now this actually looks like something that I can use. Originally released June 2017. See, this is perfect because I have a Mac that's originally released in 2008 and I can't upgrade it anymore. If you Google it, you'll find that you can't upgrade models that are older than 2008. So that wasn't going to work for me. I wanted to see the release date. Let's see, it gives me the RAM, which my initial descriptions didn't give me. It gives me the size of the SSD drive, and it also gives me the graphics card. So I'm like, this is perfect. Now, do they present this in a way that I can get a hold of it? Let's take a look over here. And here I can see as product info section main panel, I can get a hold of that entire area. And then each paragraph, it looks like, provides additional information that's very specific in nature. It's either the SSD hard drive, or it's the RAM, or it's talking about the display, or it's talking about the GPU. So yes, I can get a hold of all of the additional information. This is awesome. This is going to work. So I know from my first page that all I need to do is look at refurbished category grid, look at the href for the link, and look at the href text for to pick up the text. Also look at these three different span classes and pick up the text in the span classes. And it also looks like I'm going to have to do a little bit of string manipulation here to get rid of some of the leading and trailing white space. So that's fine. Okay, so we have a website that's going to work, and the next thing we need to do is figure out how we're going to put this information together. Well, initially I'm thinking to myself, I just want to take things one thing at a time. The first thing I want to do is I want to see if I can actually make my program reach out, get this information, and return it. And if I can do that, how am I going to package up this information? Because I want to send it off to my Finder program. I want this particular class only to deal with scraping the website. That's the only purpose for this class. And I don't want to have to instantiate an object on this class and keep that object hanging around. I just want it to do its job and to exit. So Singleton is screaming out to me for a design pattern on this class. And then further, I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to return the information to the calling class. And initially I was thinking about arrays, but I really have to be able to break this information into its individual detailed components, like what is the CPU, what is the model, what is the type, is it a desktop, is it a laptop, and the like. And I'm thinking, you know what, a hash really sounds like it's going to be the way to go on this. And so I put together this idea of passing back this huge hash, and um, then I was going to have to fill up the hash. So what I was going to do, remember we had a ton of LIs there, and each LI represented one computer. So if I just cycle through each LI, grab the information, and then throw the information into the hash, and then go on to the next LI, after adding our hash into a hash array, this ought to satisfy that requirement. And I thought, this is cool, I'm going to do that. But what about our next reach? How am I going to implement that? And I went ahead and thought of scraping additional information. This was the div that we saw. And then I'm going to grab all of the p tags, and I'm going to load them up in an array called paragraphs. And then I'm going to cycle through the array, and I'm going to extract the details. And I can get a little bit into the implementation here, but I'm not sure if you're really interested in how I actually scrape this information. There's probably 1,000 ways to do it. But the bottom line is I went ahead and just returned one hash, not a hash array, but just one hash on scraping additional information. And so from there, we've got the information from the website. We've got it all working. We've tested it. I've given each of these methods a default URL. Scraping additional information, I did this simply because for testing purposes, it was a hell of a lot easier than entering an URL every time. And then for the initial scrape, I did put in a default URL, and that's simply because this is only going to work with this URL. So it's silly to have to pass in different URLs to this singleton. So now that Scraper's done, I had to go over to Find My Mac and figure out how this controlling program was going to work. And initially I was thinking, well, you know, I'm working with real world objects here. I'm working with computers, and specifically Macs. And so I ought to have a Mac class. And this Mac class ought to have certain things that all Macs have. They have the model, CPU, number of cores, core type, and the like. And so I created the Mac class. But then I started thinking, well, wait a minute. What's the difference between a desktop and a laptop? And so as I got into researching a little bit more, I found out that desktops aren't by default offered with a display. Laptops, however, are. Laptop displays pretty much determine the laptop that you're going to get. And so I'm like, okay, well, that kind of screams inheritance here. So how about if we build two other classes? One's called a desktop and one's called a laptop. And on the desktop class, we're not going to have a display, but on the laptop class, we will. And I'm like, yeah, that actually is starting to make a little bit more sense to me. So I decided to go off in that direction. But now I have my parent class and I have all of those thousands of values that initially, not initially, but ultimately I'm going to want to present to the user. And so how am I going to do that? And I created a print method so that I can print out all of the information from the parent class. And I'm like, yeah, that's going to work perfectly. But what about the laptop class? The laptop class actually has some additional information. So what I do want to do is I wanted to print all of the information from the superclass, but then I want to just tack on the additional information of the display. And I think that's going to work really well for us. So now I'm back in Find My Mac, and I do know that I have my two different classes. I have my desktop class, I have my laptop class. But now I have to think about searching and how I'm going to perform the search. Am I really going to have to cycle through every single one of these laptop objects to figure out what the iMac Pros available are? And I'm like, nah, I don't really want to do that. But the truth of the matter is, when I'm sitting in the constructor, I actually have access to all of that information. So why not create an array of objects that are dedicated to just the Mac objects or just the MacBook Pro objects or just the MacBook objects. So now all of a sudden I'm kind of reducing my search space into these arrays. And I think that that's going to work out really well as well, because once I figure out what the user is looking for, all I have to do is just grab the corresponding array and then start looking at it. But I found that there was another problem. And that problem was when I was going through the menu, I was thinking initially, I'm just going to present a menu to the user, and I'm going to let the user choose from any available CPU, for instance, or any available core type, for instance, or number of cores. And I started finding that the choices were absolutely ridiculous. Like, for instance, I was looking for a MacBook Pro, and all of a sudden I have 20 cores. And it's like, what? That makes absolutely no sense. And I went back and looked and discovered that desktops have a different core option than laptops do. And granted, some desktop models have different core options as well, but I just wanted to get a little reasonable here. And so I thought, let me break it into either desktop configurations or laptop configurations. And here again, I'm still in the constructor and I'm thinking to myself, I still have access to each individual part of that array or that hash. So why shouldn't I utilize that right when I'm in the constructor? And so I thought, to do that, maybe I should have an array of arrays. So laptop configurations, for instance, the first element in laptop configurations multidimensional arrays would be models. And I would load in unique models for every laptop that I'm looking at, or unique CPUs for every laptop that I'm looking at. And at least that way, when I'm presenting the information to the user, it makes more sense. And I don't have to do a whole bunch of different searches and sorts to present the information. I've already got it stored from the constructor. So that was basically my thinking on that. Um, and then let's see, I also tracked all of the desktops, all of the laptops, and then I had another special category, other objects, because as I said, this website is changing constantly. And during the making of this video, I actually spotted one time something that I hadn't accounted for that was not on the original website when I started working. That's going to end up being slotted in other objects. So that's just kind of a testing catch bucket for me for the future. And then I go through, The first thing I do is I'm going to call Scraper, and I'm going to tell Scraper just use the default URL that we talked about and scrape it and give me a hash back of all of the computers that are currently available on your refurbished site. And then I'm going to look at the computer type in that hash, and I'm going to see whether or not it's a laptop or a desktop to know whether to throw it into the laptop objects or throw it into the desktop objects. And then in addition, I have another method for creating the laptop object. And in that method, now we're going to examine the individual elements in the array and determine whether it's an iMac Pro, or what, to determine which of the specific object arrays we're going to throw this particular new instance into. And so that's basically my design. Now, there's a couple of other things that I wanted to talk to you about. As I was implementing this, one of the things that I had discovered was that there were just a boatload of methods that I had to create for each desktop and laptop. And as I'm looking at it, I'm going, wait a minute, this is screaming an individual module. Pulling these methods out of desktop and laptop and putting them in a generic module, and then extending that module to be able to have access to those methods rather than writing duplicate methods between my desktop and laptop. And so that's what I did. I created a concerns module. In the concerns module, I created a findable module. And then, I'm sorry, inside the concerns namespace, I created a findable module. And then I created methods. And these methods all work on the all array. And within that all array, it's going to do certain things. So it's going to cycle through each element and do certain things. And this is going to work really well for us. So I did the findable. And then there was one other thing that I did that I wanted to mention. I'm also, for one thing, I'm checking to see if an attribute exists before I try and display it, because in order to make this work, it had to work for both desktops and laptops. And remember, only laptops had displays. So if I were to run this without finding out whether or not this element actually existed within that class, it would break. And I found that out the hard way. So I just checked first to see if there was even an attribute called display size before I went and tried to do some work on display size. So that was another thing. Oh, and then the final thing was in the initialize constructor, I wanted to go and cycle through the hash. And remember, back in Scraper, when we're scraping the website, we're also removing the nil values because I don't want to load up attributes that actually don't have values. But that also means that we're going to have a variable amount of attributes coming in as we're initializing each individual refurbished Mac. And so get that said, I can't go through this initialize method and statically assign, at display equals display of the hash, or at display size equals display size of the hash. I can't do that because it might not even exist. And so what I wanted to do is just check and see if we have that key. If we have that key, then go ahead and send that key a value. And then here's my error message. And this right here is actually screaming for a try throw block that I really wanted to do. But honestly, I have to move on. I can't do everything in this project. So I just made a mental note of it that this would be a perfect try catch block. If the key wasn't found, the thing would gracefully exit. So that is my basic layout. And back to Find My Mac, I have an entry point called Find Macs. And this now is going to kick off the user input or user interaction area of this demo. So let's go ahead and first set up our Finder. And as we had mentioned before, this goes out to Scraper. Scraper scrapes the website, gets all of those objects back, and then it's going to load up all of those objects, sorting them, creating new instances of objects, either laptop or desktop, throwing those new instances into arrays that are specific to the model of the computer that's available. And then from there, the Find My Macs will be able to do a pretty quick search. Okay, and as you can see, there's a ton of Macs on this on this website, which is cool. Okay, so now let's go ahead and look at Find My Macs. And here, remember that this initially is just static. We don't have to worry about trying to figure out how many different options there are. But here, MacBook, MacBook Air, and MacBook Pro, these are the three configurations that came in under the laptop models. We stored them in the laptop configurations under element 0, which is represented by the constant called model. And all I did was I cycled through that array and sorted it to present it in sorted order and present it here for the user. So let's go ahead and choose MacBook Pro. And yeah, let's look at the display size. Now, again, on this display sizes, it wouldn't make sense to offer a display size that we don't have. So like for instance, the Mac 17-inch, I know that Mac did used to make a 17-inch display, but why would I offer it if we don't actually have any refurbished computers in this inventory that have that display? So again, as we were loading it up, we're only loading in display sizes from the computers from the website for particular for these laptops. So I want to look at display size 3. Yeah, I want to select the CPU. And then once again, the CPU choices here are specific only to the laptops that we've loaded in. So I want to look at the CPU with 3.1 gigahertz and number of cores. Yeah, sure, why not? I want to have a quad core. And here is the output of all of our choices. MacBook Pro, 15.4-inch, 3.1 gigahertz quad core, and then all of the pricing on that. And in addition to that, I also included what our selection criteria was so that I can see that, yep, it actually did a good job of matching what we wanted to match. So would you like any additional information on the item? Absolutely. Let's go ahead and reach back out. And I want to see the cheapest one. I think that would be cool to look at. And then it's reaching back out and it's going to show us all of the configurations now that are currently loaded into this particular object. And if you remember back on the MacBook Pro details page, we saw that we had the SSD drive, we had the RAM, we had the GPU, and we have the original release date. So that shows that we were actually able to reach back out. And then one last thing, just for grins, I may want to really dig into it a little bit more. And what I can do is I can go ahead and copy this and then go back to the website, paste it into the website, and voila. There I can look at all of the additional details. Here's the information that we just scraped, and I can look at more information about what's in the box, features, specs, things like that. So I think that this particular project is really going to help me when I do finally get some money am in the market to shop for Macs. And hopefully by then Mac hasn't changed their website or Apple hasn't changed their website so much that this tool has become obsolete. And even if it has, hey, what the heck, I can probably go ahead and just update it a little bit. That is my project in a nutshell, and I thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day.